There we go. So I was born in Southeast Iowa, a really small family farm, and 12 years ago, moved to Iowa State University, transferred in as a junior in business economics, planned to go off to law school and become a patent attorney. I lasted 2 semesters before I dropped out for another career, and that was a career in professional poker. So when you think of poker, you may think of going to Las Vegas, sitting at the poker table, long days, long nights. And about 10% of my play was playing in tournaments all over the place between Europe and Vegas. But 90% of the time actually looked like this and that. So I played primarily online poker, upwards of 40 tables at once, so about 3,000 hands an hour, a couple million hands of poker each year. To me, it was very much a mathematical science, and everything was going well until April 2011 rolled around. I woke up one morning and signed on to my online poker clients and received this message. So the Department of Justice had seized all of the major online poker sites in the US because online poker was not regulated. So at that point, I had a decision to make to either move abroad to continue playing online poker or return to school and try to become an adult. So I actually returned to Iowa State University, but I switched majors. While I was playing poker, I was blogging a lot about my travels and strategy behind playing the game full time. And I realized I was a really bad writer and storyteller, so I wanted to get a little bit better. I switched to an English major. I crammed 63 credits into 3 semesters. And then I decided I wanted to get into marketing writing. So I took a job with a Fortune 500 company out in the Denver, Colorado area. And I thought most of my time would be spent in the mountains and getting out on the trails. But the reality was, over 60 hours a week looked more like this. And about 9 months into this job, I realized I do not make a good employee. So I gave away and sold everything I had, put in my notice, and after about a 1 year with the Fortune 500 company, I packed my bags and moved abroad to go back to playing poker. I ended up in Dublin, Ireland on a 1 year holiday visa. Well, there I traveled the European poker tour circuit, continued to play online poker, got more into coaching and investing in smaller stakes players. Loved it there, never really wanted to leave, and I was asked very nicely in early 2014 to leave the country because my visa was up and they wouldn't extend it. So I ended up back in Iowa, and at this point, I had met a lot of poker players turned angel investors in technology startups. And they were telling me that tech startups and building tech companies was more fast paced than playing 40 tables of online poker at once. So I was intrigued, but I had no business ideas of my own. So I was in Ames, here where Iowa State University is, and I was searching for a startup to join, a really small team. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I thought working with a small team and being able to execute and actually bring a product or a service to life was awesome. And that's when I came across a team from Iowa State University competing in that year's Thought for Food Challenge. So Thought for Food is a global competition that was sponsored by Syngenta and Microsoft in 2014. And its focus was on food security for a growing population. So by 2050, we hit 10 billion people. What does food security mean? And our team kept coming back to this statistic. Globally speaking, 1/3 of all food produced goes to waste. So here in the States, when we think of food waste, it's oftentimes what I don't finish on my plate. But abroad in developing regions, it can be much more along the lines of a subsistence farmer or someone living off the land, not having access to proper post-harvest techniques. So a lot of the food just rots on the vine. So we sat down as a team. The competition was very wide open, 2 products or services. You could focus on any region. And we ultimately decided to launch what would become the company, my first food tech company, Kinosol. And at Kinosol, we wanted to focus on solar food dehydrators for farmers in developing regions. So very much a household level, a way to dehydrate your food and then storage with it so you can have access to it year round and decrease your post-harvest loss. The picture on the left is our very first prototype. It's really ugly. I'm aware of that, but it did function. So we were pretty excited. Flash forward to 6 months later, getting user testing back from in-country. It evolved, and our fifth prototype is the picture on the right. About a year after that, we had started selling this version, this prototype, so essentially a seventh version. The user feedback kept coming back to us. It had to be more durable. We wanted it to be flat packed. And just in case it fell off the back of a truck, you could still dehydrate your fruits or vegetables. And today, Keenan Salt is still going and growing. I'm no longer in the day-to-day. I just remain on the board of directors. And this is our commercial unit, the Keenan Salt Orinda. That's been distributed all over the world, about 50 countries worldwide. Most of our customer base is in Eastern Africa. And while building Keenan Salt, I spent a lot of time in Eastern Africa and was almost entirely focused on the food problem abroad. But I kept coming back to this question of, here in the Midwest and most places, you think of seasonality with food. So is there a way to create access to reliable local food no matter where you're at and make sure it's available year round? And that's when I started talking with an old college friend who had a background in biochemistry and biology, very much an engineering mindset. And when we were talking about the future of food production, we kept coming back to indoor farming. So we asked ourselves, is indoor farming the answer to the past question of creating access to reliable local food everywhere year round? So we started looking at indoor farming, what it really means. Most indoor farms around the world use hydroponics, so no soil. With hydroponics, the roots of the plant are always submerged in water and nutrients. And if you're going to grow lettuce, it takes you about 4 weeks. So you get about 12 harvest cycles a year. And indoor farms today, over 90% of them look to utilize cubic feet, so everything's stacked. So you have a lot of parts, everything's stationary. You usually have to have aisle space because you have people going to and from the plant sites. You need scissor lifts and ladders, and they're very labor intensive. And all of that adds up to an indoor farm on average taking 7 years to reach profitability. And that's a long time, and that's why a lot of indoor farms go out of business. But at Nebula, we wanted to start flipping these methods and take an entirely different approach. So instead of hydroponics, we wanted to focus on aeroponics. So with aeroponics, we pressurize the water and nutrients into a really, really fine mist. We hit the roots directly with that mist. And then that allows us to save on our inputs, such as water and nutrients. And then the roots of the plant have better access to oxygen. So we see faster growth rates. Instead of growing a head of lettuce that takes 4 weeks, we can grow it in 3 weeks. We can go from 12 harvest cycles a year up to 17. And then we started thinking about everything being stationary and stacked and horizontal. We flipped that method as well. We decided to create plant walls and then start mobilizing them. So this is one of our early prototypes. Again, ugly prototype, but the functionality was there. And then because our mission at Nebulum today is to create access to reliable local food everywhere, growing year round, we need hardware plus software to accomplish this mission. By going vertical, we've been able to double our growing surfaces. By going from hydroponics to aeroponics, you can increase the harvest cycles by 40%. Our software acts as the on-site horticulturalist, so it maintains the day-to-day of the growing with the growing equipment. And all of this combined equals helping an indoor farm reach profitability in just 2 years. Another shot of our model farm we're building here in the Iowa State University Research Park. We have about 1,000 square feet. Each one of these 5 rows are 40 feet long. All in all, we'll be growing about 15,000 pounds of lettuce each year from this space. Outside of lettuce, we do grow a couple of other crops. So microgreens like broccoli sprouts and micro radish, herbs such as basil. In the future, vine crops such as tomatoes, cucumbers, strawberries. And up until the end of February of this year, we were proving out our model of our technology by being our own first customer. So we have this model farm. Our revenue is all coming from the produce we're growing and selling from the model farm. And at that time, we were wholesaling to restaurants and grocers. And at the beginning of March, we started talking with our restaurant customers, so the chefs and or owners, about what their plans were for COVID. And the writing was on the wall that at some point they were going to close for some amount of time. So we asked ourselves, what do we do? Because 3/4 of our monthly revenue is coming from wholesaling to restaurants. And that's when we took 6 days, sprinted as a team, launched a direct-to-consumer lettuce subscription service. We're about 8 months into that service now. A couple of stats here. 4 of every 5 of our customers are with us beyond month 4. We always encourage our customers to leave out the boxes, the ice packs, when we deliver to their door. It's kind of the modern day milkman approach that allows us to cut down costs and have better margins. Then 2 stats we're really proud of is the fact that our average harvest to delivery time is just 3 hours or 180 minutes. And then because we plopped down an indoor farm in the heart of Ames, which is a 70,000 person college town, our average food miles are about 3, with their closest customer being 0.85 miles away. And just last month, we celebrated our 500th box delivery. With that, Coy, I know you have a lot of questions for me, so feel free to jump on in. And if anyone wants to reach me afterwards, I'm happy to answer any questions. My email will just leave up here for the presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that background. It's and Nebulum is a really interesting company, I think. Just the entire concept of growing plants indoors is completely novel, and well, not completely novel, but it's definitely up and coming as like technology progresses, and the improvements that you've seen with like misting, that sounds pretty interesting as well.
Absolutely.
And so my questions actually revolve around your background and the role that you played in starting this company, because if I remember correctly, you're not the technical founder. So I'm wondering, what was the role that you played in the company, and what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, good question. So I'm the non-technical co-founder. I'm not very good with power tools. I can build some basic prototypes, and I can't code at all.
Mm-hmm.
So when starting a company such as Kinosol or Nebulum, no matter what industry you're going after, what problem you're trying to tackle, I think it really starts with understanding your strengths. So for mine is strategy, and I nerd out over business models and different approaches and kind of that lean mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And another one of my strengths lies in essentially spreadsheets and calculations, and that's from the poker background.
Mm-hmm.
So when starting Kinosol, there were 4 co-founders, and each of us had various strengths. So we always tried to focus on playing to those strengths, and if it were a weakness, find whoever within the co-founders or the team that could handle it the best, whatever that problem was, whether it was engineering or sales, etc. As long as you start with that understanding among your co-founders and everyone can play to their strengths, I feel like whenever a problem does arise, it helps delegation and figuring out who is going to solve that be much cleaner, which can be really good. As far as Nebulum goes, I like to think of Danon, our co-founder and CTO, or Chief Technology Officer, and myself as kind of a yin and yang, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So Danon's strengths lie in all of the engineering, everything you've seen with our growing equipment coming to life, keeping the plants happy. That's Danon's expertise, with his background in biology especially. Whereas and then selling those happy plants and then selling that equipment is on my strengths. So that kind of balance that we go after is really, really important. And then as you expand out your team, you also want to think about complementing strengths and then filling those gaps, or what I like to think of as finding a missing puzzle piece. If you need help with customer success, and that's a weak point of your organization, that's probably at the top of your priority for hiring or bringing on the next team member.
Gotcha. My next question about that is going to involve, how do you identify that type of weak point within your organization? But I wanted to really quickly, I realized that I missed the questions from the Q&A. And so I'd like to address those really quick because they pertain to the slides. This first one I like a lot. Do you see Nebulum being used when colonizing other planets?
Yeah, a good question. It'd be pretty cool to become the John Deere for Mars, essentially. So aeroponics is one of the strongest ways to grow plants in zero gravity conditions. Aeroponics was actually studied by NASA for how to grow plants at the International Space Station. So the possibility is there. Bringing us down to just this current world, for me, the next steps for us at Nebulum to really expand out and get the name out there and the technology out there is through franchising, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our own Nebulum farm here in central Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
As we expand out, we'll find quote unquote franchisees to have their own Nebulum farm. So it could be a Nebulum farm owned and operated by Koya in your community. And what's really exciting for us is the density and distribution around that. 20,000 cities in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Every city could essentially support a Nebulum farm. So it gives us a good starting market, especially for just the greens we currently grow. And as we expand into other products, it really opens up that access for as many people to have the opportunity to have the local food available to them just down the street year round in their communities.
Yeah, I think that's actually like a great segue into the next question here, because the question was, well, what was one of the, whoa, this is expensive moments, I think in terms of the hardware, because you had mentioned that Nebulum helps combat this as a plug and play type of solution.
Yeah, so I could talk about the 1,000,001 things we've done wrong, but a quote comes to mind that I think is really important for the founders and likely the CEO of the startup to be aware of is whatever you think it's going to take for time and money, you should double both.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the fact. For us, we're hardware, software, and living organisms.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of moving parts, so to speak. Software engineering, electrical engineering, none of those are cheaper skill sets. So
Mm-hmm.
we've had to go out and raise money from essentially day one. We've done a friends and family round, an angel round, and now we're in the midst of closing up a seed round. But we have taken the approach through many trials and errors of our growing equipment, especially on the hardware side, of fewer parts equal fewer problems. So our earlier prototypes, there were still stationary parts.
Mm-hmm.
So there were just a lot of stationary parts. And when we started to realize we could mobilize the irrigation system, we were able to cut our parts by over 90%. So now we've shifted to what I like to consider an IKEA model.
Mm-hmm. And it's like can be pieced together and kind of like by the farmers themselves.
Yeah. So essentially, we want our customer base, so our franchisees, to, if they see the opportunity for local food year round in their community, they can pull the trigger without having any background in agriculture or horticulture, for that matter. So our software dashboard maintains, let's say you want to go and grow red butterhead lettuce, you push red butterhead lettuce. Everything else is maintained for the irrigation needs, the lighting needs, etc., of the plants throughout their life cycle.
Mm-hmm. So
the simpler, the better. And we've always had to learn the hard way, functionality over features to start with.
Gotcha. Let's see. It looks like there's a couple more questions here. My company. And then
looks like one from the main chat. Educational background. So yeah, I started as a business economics major, planned to go off to law school and become a patent attorney. Dropped out after a couple of semesters to play and coach poker full time. When online poker was taken down in the US, that's when I returned to school and got an English degree with a focus on creative writing.
Let's see. It looks like one of the questions here, it sounds like a personal question. I'm going to read it off, and then I guess if you'd give your opinion on it, that would probably be helpful. And then this would actually be returning to the strengths conversation. So after this, then let's talk about like the weak points. So like going back to your strengths conversation, I may run my company, but my team is building my product. I don't feel very useful and see myself quickly replaceable. What non-technical skills have you seen to be, for a founder / CEO, extremely valuable to acquire? I think this matches your background like pretty well as like being a non-technical.
Yeah, good question. We all have imposter syndrome. So whether you are really good at technical problem solving, you're building something, building a product, or you can't build it and you're trying to sell it, we all have those moments of asking, are we good enough to be in this position? It's kind of weird to go from a poker player who clicked buttons online to being the face of a company that's growing and trying to change how food distribution and food is grown. Having genuine conversations with co-founders or early team members around your strengths is very important. And if you make yourself transparent, it helps improve communication from day one. Whereas if you're the non-technical co-founder, I can imagine that the scenario may be, if there's two co-founders, you have your CTO, so someone who's actually building the product, and then you're the second step of that equation of needing to think about how to sell that product. So most times, if you start off with a two-person company, it's going to fall into a CEO, CTO role. The CEO needs to think about externally getting champions or ambassadors for your product, getting people excited for that product and actually closing those sales. And then you need to rely just as heavily on step one, your co-founder and CTO, who will likely be internal within the organization, building that product. So if they have the expertise in building it, and you can find the customer base and you go out there and build up confidence as you're actually selling your product, it's kind of a 1-2 combo that I think about. But it really just comes back to that transparent conversation with your team to figure out your strengths and then playing to your strengths, in my opinion.
I think, that also kind of answers the question of how do you identify the weak points, is really being like transparent with each other about what it is that you can and can't do. And I think this brings up the question, like, what are some things that are important to know about your co-founder? So like if you were to start another company right now, for example, and you were looking for somebody to start it with, like what would be some things that you would want out of them?
So I'll start with, it's like a marriage. It's a really long-term commitment. And a quote that comes to mind is, the band name stays the same, but the band members change. So, from the two examples with the two food tech companies that I've started, on Keenasol, 4 co-founders day one. A year and a half in, 3 co-founders left. 2.5 years in, 2 co-founders left. 4.5 years in, I left the day-to-day, and now the company is run by co-founder and CEO Michaela Sullivan. And we've all had different directions of our lives happen. And I think as a base understanding, at least for a company that you see yourself as down the road selling it, it comes into, can you commit to 10 years? Because realistically, that's the short end of bringing the vision to life. And I think on day one, it's kind of the honeymoon phase. Co-founders are really excited. Maybe you even have a couple of beta users or a couple of customers just a couple months in. But then what happens when the trial of sorrow essentially hits, or things aren't going according to plan, and people are starting to second guess themselves, the product, the team, and that happens to all of us. So that genuine conversation around the commitment, you and your co-founders need to understand it's a 10-year journey, which is a really, really long time. But I would encourage anyone college-aged, this is the best time to try and go start a company. Especially during the pandemic. I think your flexibility in your online classes and scheduling is much better right now. And I feel like if you are going to start a company and you're going to try to go tackle a really, really big problem, it also needs to come back to that transparency when you're searching for a co-founder. So up front, if I were going to go start a company today, I'd have kind of a pros cons list about myself, and focus more on the pros side, and realize that, okay, if on the con side, these are my weaknesses, I need to go find somebody that's kind of opposite or flip-flop back. But having that conversation up front, making sure that they're bought into the 10 years to bring the vision to life is really important. And then back to the marriage thing too. Can you see yourself working with them when things aren't going according to plan? And that's a conversation you need to have sooner rather than later. Otherwise, it causes a blow up. And some people quote, startups die from suicide, not competition. I think that's very true. A lot of startups just implode internally.
Yeah. What does that look like? Like, what is the difference between being a day-to-day member and then being a board member? I'm just curious about what that means for you and your company?
Yeah. So, on the corporation side, so for instance, Kennesaw, we were fortunate enough to bootstrap, and all of the funding to get us started came from business plan competitions. We entered every single one we could across the world, and we're able to raise a couple $100,000 through business plan competitions and launch the product. One important thing is we charged for our prototypes. I think that's really key. I meet a lot of companies, early stage, where they have a product out there and it's free. And when I ask why, they say they need to build up their user base first. So I would challenge people to consider charging for your prototypes, your betas, essentially. But then from the standpoint of in the day-to-day and in building that company, it's you're in the trenches together. And as you start to get more and more customers and you start to expand your team, and there's more and more demand essentially for your time, delegation becomes really key. And with Kennesaw, we were going the direction of solar food dehydrators, and then notice another opportunity that require us to be in country a lot more around experiential learning. And that I wasn't too interested in. I'd spent enough time working with that customer base, and I wanted to spend more time in other areas. And then those conversations started, and essentially about a year in to those conversations, that's when it made sense for me to leave the company in the day-to-day. And then remaining on the board, there's still the high level decisions to make and the strategy coming in, and the board members trying to open up all the resources that they possibly can. But in the day-to-day, I have no decision making. So I leave that all up and I put all faith in the actual team running the day-to-day.
Yeah. So that type of high level decision making, it seems like I get the impression that it's something that you're really good at and that you understand. And so I'm wondering, I heard when we were talking that there was somewhat of a pivot of Nebulum's business model when COVID hit. What did that look like, and what types of decisions did you consider making?
Yeah, that's something where we needed the whole team to buy in. So if we're sitting on a half dozen team members and everybody was happy with the direction we were going, and all of a sudden COVID hits, it's a very easy moment to get discouraged. And us having essentially an all team meeting to say, we've got a bunch of lettuce needing harvested. We lost all of our customers. What are our options? It really started with just brainstorming with Post-it notes and trying to figure out if we could get larger offtake agreements for grocers. And during that time, the biggest decision and turning point for us was focusing on, we had wanted to be raising our prices, and I was trying to figure out the right moment to. So we were wholesaling for, I'll just say rough math, about $8 a pound to restaurants for lettuce. And we wanted to test to see if we could get close to the ceiling of charging direct to consumer. So we launched that website, put it at essentially $12 a pound to kind of test that. And then since it's taken off, we've wanted to double down on our experiment. But we did treat it like an experiment with the new direction. And we gave ourselves 2 weeks to see if we could get essentially 10 paying customers through the website, and much more of an organic approach.
Right.
That started off well, and now we're up to about 50 subscribers. Our one farm location here can support about 300. So we're 1/6 of the way there. But treating it like an experiment really helps as well, because most experiments are going to fail. So when you have to pivot, just if you even use that rhetoric, experiment, or the team is sprinting for the next 2 weeks to just test something out, that helps everybody wrap their minds around the fact that this isn't going to work, or it's going to work and we're going to double down on it.
Right. And then if it doesn't work, then you can fall back and continue working on what you were working on. Just to clarify, and please correct me if I get this wrong, but I think before COVID, you said something along the lines of aiming to be like the John Deere for indoor farming, right? Where you're selling like the hardware to farmers, and then you're able to wholesale to businesses. And then the transition was creating this online platform where you could sell directly to consumers. And then in doing that, you also create a way for people to buy this equipment and know that they have someplace to sell their produce.
Yeah, you're spot on. So we see our strengths in being a technology company.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, we wanted to sell the growing equipment and license the software for recurring revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So setting out to become the John Deere for indoor farming was our initial approach.
Right.
When we started becoming our own first customer, so to speak, and we were selling the produce grown from our technology and our growing equipment, that's something that we had to learn the ropes, so to speak, about what was the pricing models in this area compared to another area. When you're working with a grocer who the decision makers are at the store level compared to grocers, your decision makers are at the corporate headquarters level. So as we were learning all of that, we started putting together a playbook, and we saw it as, well, this is valuable once we sell the equipment to, let's say, a new indoor farmer. And we can just say, this is how it's worked for us in our one location. But when COVID hit and we had the chance to get in front of consumers instead of to restaurant owners and chefs, we realized that feedback cycle was a much cleaner line of sight working with our customers who are the consumers in the households. They kept giving us faster feedback and stronger feedback. And we were able to iterate upon our product, our packaging, our delivery experience, that entire part of our supply chain, which we currently own from the seeding clear through fulfillment to the household. And that's something that was really exciting to our team. And then we realized that getting the brand out there in front of consumers makes it to where instead of us only having the equipment and the software to offer, there's a chance that we have the equipment, the software, and the playbook that essentially allows them to market and sell the produce without having to think of a brand or trying to think of their own marketing tactics. So again, it's about lowering the barrier of entry for someone to become an indoor farm owner. So we see that all as a bundled service now, and what I like to consider a franchising opportunity.
Just out of curiosity, like, what do the margins look like on selling it? Or like, how long is it until you start becoming profitable as one of these farmers?
Yeah, so rough ballpark math is we want them to get started for low 5 figures. And essentially fees. We come in, we deploy the equipment, we own the equipment. They'll pay a monthly fee, and they're profitable at around month 15. So that way, you're getting to that 1.5 year mark, you're into profitability.
Yeah.
And if we can help supply you with the platform, the growing equipment, the software, even source the seeds and nutrients for you, that's really important for us too, because it, again, just lowers the barrier of entry and makes their accessibility to having their own indoor farm a lot easier.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, it looks like we have a couple questions in the chat, and this one kind of connects to the previous one I just asked. Is how much is it to purchase a part of the franchise?
So we are in the middle of closing our seed round of investment. This allows us to essentially complete the rest of our own indoor farm here and then launch with our first franchisee. We're still figuring out those numbers and how it's going to work and what we can help people with financing. So I could not give you a number today.
For sure. And then the second one says, are you better than Dan Bilzerian?
I think Dan Bilzerian lifetime poker is down around 30 million. So I'd hope so.
Oh, I didn't realize he was a poker player. Well, yeah, let's see. So I guess then we've got like kind of the business model down then, right? So that's what this company is doing. And it seems like, or wait, actually one second. There's a couple more questions before we get to that. Let's see, would you ever consider nonprofit in inner city food desserts?
Yeah, good question. So we've been looking into like opportunity zones and real estate developers who are focused on that, to where, let's say, a potential investor comes in for the tax credits and it's much more of a philanthropical play. So maybe for every pound of lettuce they sell, one is gifted to a local food bank. And I know 2 of them are looking to set up as nonprofits. Us ourselves, it wouldn't make sense at the stage we're at in our trajectory, but we'd be happy to partner with other nonprofits, if that makes sense for their communities and having their own indoor farm.
It sounds like going nonprofit is almost like a business decision.
Very much so.
Let's see, what was the biggest challenge you faced when starting your company, and how did you overcome it? That's a very general question. I think you can fill in.
Yeah. I'll go back to I think it's night and day difference when you have users or customers who essentially aren't paying you, like you're giving them something for free. And then on the other side of that coin is you're charging them something. Mm-hmm. And I feel like too many people are afraid to try to charge for their prototypes or, their beta versions. So I would encourage everyone to try to charge for it. If it's actually solving the problem you've set out to do, then it's saving someone time or creating a benefit for someone. So it's natural that there should be a transaction. But I've had to make that mistake before of, not charging for a product right at the beginning and missed out on getting a check and getting to revenue months earlier, which then impacted the rest of our trajectory for fundraising for the next year. So the earlier you can try to charge for your product, the better, in my opinion. And I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. Let's see, what differs a replaceable co-founder? What differs a replaceable co-founder and an irreplaceable co-founder?
You'd hope everybody was irreplaceable and they can see the vision through. I would say it's, for me, more of a difference between a co-founder and an employee. And here at Nebulum, we have a really big stock option pool for all of our hires. We feel like it's going to take a team to go after a championship and actually see our vision through. So it's not just about the co-founders. But if you think about the roles and responsibilities, and you both set out on that journey together, and let's say it's just two of you as co-founders, then all the weight's on your shoulders. As soon as you bring in essentially employee number one, you want to put a little bit of weight on their shoulders, not too much. But then the varying degrees of the stress and the pressure need to add up to being compensated and essentially in that sweat equity. So again, it goes back to the communication around finding your co-founder, the transparency, committing to the 10 years. Hopefully you can see that journey together all the way through. But then if life happens, hopefully you were compensated up until that point, and then your equity in that company is reflected upon your commitment to whenever you left.
Cool. Let's see, there's one more question here, but I'm going to save this until the end. I just want to make sure we get through a couple more things. I think that everybody will find them pretty interesting as well. And then, I'll go back to Q&A in a bit.
Awesome.
So I think before I open to questions, we started talking about the business model, or we finished talking about the business model and what the company was going to do. And I'm wondering what it was like to start on that, as in you deciding on what business model to go with, because with doing indoor farms, it's clear that there's multiple different ways that you could have taken it. So what are some questions that you asked yourself when considering what it was that you're going to do? How do you know that your business idea has potential?
Yeah, so it starts with customer discovery. I think before you spend any money or time working on a product or a service, you need to figure out who you're actually building that for. And something that I see, if business model canvas is discussed in the Entrepreneurship Association there, the entrepreneurship clubs, that's a good starting point of figuring out, who your ideal customer is. But essentially with customer discovery, you're going to put together some assumptions. So if you are trying to solve a problem like Nebulum is, you start with, okay, new and expanding indoor farmers are going to want to buy our growing equipment. So we know the statistic is 7 years to reach profitability. Why is that? Okay, the equipment is antiquated. There's little to no software. So I wonder why an indoor farm owner hasn't implemented software or wanted to automate more. Like what is stopping them from doing that? And then eventually you arrive at the assumptions of, okay, there's a lot of parts, there's a lot of upfront capital costs. So then you want to get in front of that person for customer discovery, and you need to confirm if your assumptions were correct or not correct. And if they're not correct, you're going to go back to the drawing board, so to speak. And then you look back and you didn't have to waste any time or money building something for someone that, maybe they didn't want it in the first place. If they are correct, what's really cool about customer discovery interviews is the fact that as soon as you actually build a prototype and you have that minimal viable product you want to get out there, then you likely have your first starting customers too. So customer discovery, it has to start there. And that's all just around proving or disproving your assumptions around the problem you're solving.
Right. This is kind of a side question, but what are some components of like a customer that you might need to know that you would like use to define them? So like, for example, like a component of defining a customer might be like a pain point, or it might be like their age range or something like that.
Yeah, good question. So in your customer profile, your ideal customer profile, some people call it, demographics definitely matter. And another point I'd like to mention is the decision makers. So can you get to someone who can actually pay you for the product or service, right? And if you can't start with them, what does that line of sight look like? But for us, so as an example at Nebulum right now, for our direct-to-consumer subscription service, our average customer is a 41 to 65-year-old female, median to higher household income, lives in either very much like city center, so to speak, or a suburb area. And because of that, we've been able to focus our marketing efforts, our Facebook ads, door hangers, radio ads, all towards that demographic. But that is also something that you figure out during customer discovery interviews of, am I talking to the right person? Do they fit my assumption around who the customer is going to be? And one trick or hack that you can do in customer discovery interviews, because a lot of people know people similar to them, of course. So at the end of an interview, if you are talking with this person and your assumptions were there, a pretty ideal person, ask them for connections or introductions to their friends who are in the similar space. That'll save you a lot of time as well.
Yeah, that would be a cool topic to touch on, as well as like networking and what it means to have like valuable connections to people. But I guess let's go through a little bit more and talk about let's see, like I think we touched on it a little bit before, but like knowing that people will pay for the product that you're making. And you said like charging during like prototypes, but then I know you also mentioned that there was a problem where in some cases it was too expensive for people to buy.
So yeah, when you think about pricing, you have to, every number you start with is going to be arbitrary, and that's okay. When investors are asking you what's your 3-year projections, all those numbers are arbitrary. For the most part, they want to understand your logic and your reasoning about how you arrive at that number. And that helps, give them more of a picture of who you are and how you think. As far as pricing a product goes, I am always intrigued by the ceiling. Like, what is the most we could charge, and how you could essentially continue to move that price up, understanding there will be some churn, but then ultimately figuring out that price point that people are willing to pay for, the margins make sense, etc. But one thing I'll point out is, if you're selling prototypes, or you are essentially charging for people to use the beta version, something we did with Nebulum is we had a paid pilot project that lasted for 15 months. And during that time, we were working with prototypes, so things were always breaking, but it was invaluable to get that feedback from the customer. We were renting prototypes to them, and then they were paying us every single month. And they kept coming back to us and saying, okay, the production per square foot doesn't really add up. If we're going to pay this much each month, we need to be hitting this production number. And that led us to going from prototypes that were horizontal and stacked to the vertical mobile walls that we have today. So directly from that customer feedback. But at the end of the day, you can also look at it as, if you're building a more capital intensive technology like we are, you can look at it as beta users or early customers who are paying for those prototypes are actually paying you to advance your technology. And the biggest benefit you have is taking that customer feedback and iterating upon your product from their feedback instead of just what's in your mind.
Where did some of your funding come from in order to do that research besides the paying customers in the pilot program?
Yeah, so with Kinosol, it was all bootstrapped, like I mentioned. We were able to get to profitability pretty early on. We had a smaller product, lower cost, and won a bunch through business plan competitions. For Nebulum, the co-founders put in a little bit of our own money, small 5 figures in total. And then we raised a friends and family round in 2017. In 2018, raised an angel round. And then we're right in the midst of closing our seed round now. For us, that's everything from small family offices to some of our current investors, Ag Startup Engine, 1219 Ventures, Y Combinator, and then angel investors between Iowa and California. All in all, we've raised about $700,000 a day for Nebulum before we close this round.
I'm sure your pitch has clearly like changed over the course of the business. How do founders feel about that? I think this actually might answer one of the Q&A questions. It's like,
awesome.
Did you ever go back to an investor saying, hey, this was actually a lot more expensive than we thought, mind helping us out? Did it hurt your credibility?
So interesting point on that is when you bring on investments, like a marriage as well, a venture fund writes a check and they're looking to get their money back in the multiple sometime in the next 10 years, but it's a long journey together. And something that I've noticed as an observation in having to talk with a lot of investors over the years, 1,000 plus now, 6 years into my tech journey. I personally like partnering with investors who have previously been a founder. And I think that's really important for my quirks and what I look for in investors as partners. If they have started a company before, even if it didn't work out, they grew it, they had to shut it down, etc. They have empathy and they understand times are going to be tough and it is a roller coaster ride. Whereas if you have investors who was an employee somewhere, really well off, everything's worked out for them there, but they've never had to make the decisions around hiring, firing, the books every month, how to find those key team members, what happens when the product's not working at all, then a lot of times that empathy will be lacking when things do go wrong. But in our case, we've tried to be as transparent as possible. It is capital intensive with what we're trying to do. And what's really exciting for us is the upside to completely change the way food is grown on a global scale and to eliminate the mindset of having seasonality. So the investors we partner with, they see the vision and they're aligned with us, and that's really important. So whenever something goes wrong, they're usually the first there to walk through it and give their feedback and try to help. But that's something where every single month we send out an investor update. It talks about our runway, our burn, has usually a big ask from our current investors of we need a connection here, or what are your thoughts on XYZ? But being transparent in those monthly updates to investors is really key because it allows them to know right at the moment when something is going wrong and if they can help.
I really like that you said that because, earlier we had Tamara Steffens in, who's the managing director for Microsoft's M12 venture. And she actually outlined the exact same type of investors. It's like there's one group who are MBAs and they're really heavily business oriented, studied well. And then there's a second group that are people that have experienced and then gone and became investors. And she said that it was really important as well that like transparency. The question was asked, like, what is the most important thing about a relationship between you and your investments? And she said transparency as well. And so it's good to hear that that's consistent across the board. It sounds like
spot on. Awesome.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be moving on then to this term called expected value. And I think Nick just asked a question. Um, did you use your poker skills to gain money for your business or pay bills for business? Is your company public on the stock market? Wow, that is a lot of questions.
Okay, so not public. We're private. Nebula Inc. Kennesaw is private as well. So the biggest benefits from going from playing poker professionally to starting technology companies is understanding calculated risk. And so, Coy, I'll cover expected value here in a second. But as far as poker goes, I had a 4.5-year career with that stint in between of it not being allowed in the U.S. and moving abroad. I was fortunate enough to actually go out and raise investment myself for playing poker, so I can move up in stakes. And then I treated it very much like a business with 3 revenue streams. So one, I went out and sought investment and played at the stakes that I felt comfortable at. Sometimes didn't feel comfortable at. And then I invested in smaller stakes players, and I coached them to help them understand the stakes they were playing at, help them have good return on investments for themselves and myself. And then third, I also coached for an hourly. So I did not really use any of my poker earnings specifically for startup expenses into Kennesaw. That being said, just to have, I love to travel. So most of my poker winnings was spent on traveling abroad throughout the years. So in thinking about poker and the number one skill, in my opinion, poker to tech companies, it comes into expected value. So you may hear it referenced as like a plus EV or a minus EV instance or play. So in poker, everything came down to pot odds. So if I have this hand and my opponent has bet this percentage of chips or this many chips, and the pot is this big, do I mathematically have the correct odds to call, or do I have the correct odds to raise or go all in, etc. How that translates over to tech companies is oftentimes when you go about funding. I'm pretty outspoken on this topic of, you'll hear people talk about going after non-dilutive funding. So let's say National Science Foundation, so SBIRs, going after certain grants, etc. And I'll walk through one scenario. So right now, the most common SBIR funding a tech company goes after would probably be with National Science Foundation. And it's a couple $100,000 as essentially a grant. And there's so many applications every year that the success rate of these are close to 15%. And that going into it. So if you look at, you have a 15% chance of winning a $200,000 grant, your expected value of that is $30,000. When you start thinking about the time that you put into working on that grant, especially among the co-founders and likely having a grant writer on the team, you're going to spend a couple hundred hours of your company's time to try to go after this grant that has expected value of only $30,000. In my opinion, expected value, you have a stronger or a more expected value or a plus EV. If you would spend that same amount of time talking with customers, or at least doing customer discovery, or likely going after angel investment. I feel like if you spend a couple hundred hours talking with angel investors, when their average check size is 10 to 20,000, their expected value is going to be much higher than that 30,000 at the end of the day. So if you are the CEO of your company, you're always thinking about the strategies and how to execute and actually make those sales. When it's just you and your co-founder or co-founders, trying to think in terms of expected value of how you spend your time will ultimately save you time and money, and it may set yourself up for an entirely different trajectory with your company. So I'd encourage everyone to kind of just Google and understand more about expected value, and then opportunity costs, implied odds. Those all are kind of in the same realm.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind helping me understand here for 1 second. So say you have like $100,000 that you're going to go after from some source, and then you spend 100 hours on it, then your expected value per hour would be $1,000. Is that completely wrong?
Yeah, if it were guaranteed and it was just broken down of, you had to spend 100 hours on this, and at the end of the 100 hours, then that's much more of a confirmed. Now you just have to figure out the variance or the luck factor or the statistics around that.
Mhm.
That's why if you spent the same couple hundred hours going after angel investors,
Mhm.
and you felt like we're going to get one check out of every 50 angel investors we talk to,
Mhm.
but then an angel investor an hour, essentially you're going to go talk to the couple hundred, average check size of 10,000, then you can look at your expected value, that's 40,000.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Oh, so that's interesting. It really does break it down into a mathematical formula that way.
it does.
Let's see. So, ever applied to a government grant? I think you just touched on that a little bit. Have
Yeah,
you?
so we've been awarded some funding through the state of Iowa. It's called proof of commercial relevance, and then demonstration funding. So it's essentially low interest loans or royalty agreements. They're really good for early stage companies, kind of friends and family round through Series A to go after. And at the time, our expected value of going after both of those was very, very high. So we went after them and won about 125,000 in grants and small interest loans.
Mhm.
We've also gone after an SBIR NSF grant before, and we failed. And that was kind of a learning experience of the fact that the expected value was much lower than we originally thought it was going to be.
Got it. Well, let's see. I think that has run through all of my questions, and just gonna wait like a minute and see are there like any questions from the audience, because um, yeah, I think what you've said today has been like very interesting, and I'm completely content with. I've had all my questions answered.
Awesome.
um,
Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out anytime, my email, just c@nebulum.com. I'll put it here in the chat too. However I can help. And then I started blogging a little bit more frequently,
Where
which
can
is
you link it?
Clayton Mooney. Yeah, ClaytonMooney.com. And a lot of my blogs are featured on Clay and Milk, which covers Midwest tech news kind of before I publish it on my blog.
Mhm.
Oh, one more question, maybe?
Yeah, it says drop a hair care routine.
Yeah, my hair is very windswept today. This is the longest my hair's been. So I do a lot of ultra running on the trails. So I probably look like a really crazy guy when I'm out there running on the trails, but I'm gonna just keep it going for now.
Respect it. Well, yeah. Oh, shoot, there's two in the chat as well. Oh, wait, that is what you said. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Clayton, for coming and having this discussion, for spending an hour of your time to talk to MSUEA, and everybody else that's attended. We advertised outside of EA as well. So,
Awesome.
yeah, thank you
Well,
everybody for coming.
yeah, thanks all for having me. Cheers.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Have a nice day, everybody.